Okay. So this will be a good overview, especially as you are a returning person. We're going to go over some of the basics that are often seen on the ACT English. Do a quick overview of the types of questions that you see on the ACT English, and just kind of a refresher on the basics. And then we'll spend some more time on more in-depth things on the next two sessions. So let's get going. You've met me before, but for anybody who will be watching this video later, my name is Miss Danner. This is my 9th year teaching. I'm teaching English and I'm currently at East Limestone High School. I'm actually at the middle school level, but it's all kind of one big campus. I am ACT certified in basics and English, so English is my jam. I'm working on my certification for reading and science, but pandemic has made continuing that a little tricky. So I'll be picking back up with those certifications when I can. My fiance and I have 3 dogs, 5 horses, 4 chickens, and a fish. So we love our animals. They're our fur babies. And here are some pictures of our lovely creatures. A little bit of a warm up today. I'd like just a little bit of a quick flash at what school you attend, what grade you're in, what's your favorite subject in school, and if you could live or travel anywhere, what would it be? So just throw that stuff into the chat box and chime in with those. I love to travel. That's why this pandemic has been especially hard. But I love to travel. I've lived in several different countries. So I would be interested to hear where you would like to travel. So take a second, type up those responses to those questions. All right. Yes, engineering is a subject. My fiance studied that in college. So he's actually a laser engineer, which I think is super cool. And he is on the team at the Missile Defense Agency. He's a contractor there, and they are designing the missile defense system that will one day, probably in about 20 to 30 years, use lasers to shoot down enemy missiles, which I just think is so cool. So yes, engineering is absolutely a subject. You've been to Spain. That's very cool. That is on my list. I have lived in Ireland. I've traveled to England, France, Ireland. We're thinking about Canada for our honeymoon if it looks like we can make it into Canada, but we do love to travel. All righty. So let's keep going. So some of our goals for today is just to go over general ACT English information, just a quick overview of what you kind of need to know going into the English section, because it is the first section of the ACT test. Knowing what types of questions you're going to see, it can help you kind of get into that mind space of, okay, this type of question is this, so I need to think about it this way. We're going to talk about just basic punctuation rules that appear on the ACT. And if we have time, we're going to do 1 to 2 timed passages and then go over those answers for anybody who has any questions about ones they might have missed. So quick overview, the ACT English is a 45-minute section, but you have to complete 75 multiple choice questions. And that can be a bit daunting. You have to move with quite a pace. This is the first section, so a lot of times you're dealing with that initial nervous energy of, I'm about to take a test. So be aware that there are 5 passages. Each passage has 15 questions, and those questions are 4 answer choices. So in your kind of timing of yourself, you want to try and plan on about 9 minutes per section. And that will give you a good buffer of time to go back if you need to look at questions, but it will keep you on pace. So about 9 minutes per 15 questions. The benefit of the English section is that you answer the questions as you're reading versus the reading section where you have to read the passage and then go into the questions. So the English section, having 45 minutes to do 75 questions, you are working at a pace, but at the same time, you don't usually have to read the passage and then go into the questions and then go back to the passage. With the English section, it is going to be on many different types and topics of passages. So don't worry about your knowledge of the subject. They're not going to be quizzing you on that. Like, for example, with the math section, they're seeing if you know your formulas and that kind of thing. With the English section, it's basically grammar based question and knowledge of language. So the categories of questions are what we call production of writing, and that's your medium sized section. So that's about 22 to 24 of your questions are going to be that production of writing. Knowledge of language is going to be about 11 to 13, and those are fewer. And they tend to be a little bit trickier. So those knowledge of language questions tend to be the one that trips students up the most. Conventions of standard English grammar usage and punctuation, those are your purely grammar-based questions. And that's a majority of your questions, or there's 39 to 41 convention questions. So as you can see, a huge chunk of what you're being assessed on is knowing your grammar rules. So with keeping that in mind, this is what they break down to be. Those conventions of standard English, that is your grammar question. That's things like verb tense, punctuation, conjunctions, pronouns, just other basic working grammar questions. The production of writing is going to be the whole passage. And usually they start the question with that phrase. That's where they're asking about the whole passage's organization, or how the whole passage develops the topic or the author's purpose. The knowledge of language questions are the how can you make it better? So they focus on your ability to edit somebody else's writing to choose answers that improve the passage. And those tend to be the trickiest questions because you have to pick the best answer. And so a lot of times you're looking at these answers and you probably thought of one in your head that's better than what they've offered you. But the question is asking you to pick the best. So be aware those knowledge of language ones can be a bit tricky. Understand that the ACT English does not evaluate spelling or vocabulary. So you're not going to get questions that on the English section where it's asking you to define words or spell a word properly. Now, they will throw some commonly misused or mistaken words like two, and two, or there, and there at you, but those don't really qualify as spelling. Some general strategies when it comes to the English is don't always trust your ear. We naturally do not speak grammatically correct. So you want to make sure you've got those rules down pat, that you can fall back onto those rules rather than does it just sound right. You want to think simple. The ACT loves to get to the point in the fewest amount of words possible. Okay. So keep in mind the shortest is not always the best answer, but you generally want to avoid the really long, wordy answer choices because those are not usually going to be the quote best answer. You want to make sure you're looking at the whole sentence. Okay. So if a sentence has two underlined portions in it asking two different questions, you want to make sure that when you have looked at a part of the underlined part, you're factoring in what else is happening in that sentence. You want to make sure paragraph chunks, okay? Answer questions in paragraph chunks rather than answering each question at one time. So read a paragraph and then do all the questions in that paragraph. And that kind of goes hand in hand with looking at the whole sentence, because if you're looking at a paragraph, you're already thinking in whole sentences versus just the bit that they've underlined. And you want to make sure you read the whole passage. There's going to be questions where information from the whole passage must be considered. So don't skip sentences that don't have anything underlined because there might be something in that sentence that you need for a later question. Keep it simple. Verb tense and writer's voice is going to be consistent throughout. So if something has been written in past tense for the whole thing, and then all of a sudden you've got a sentence that's in the present tense, and they're asking you to look at the tense, then you want to make sure you're going, oh, wait, everything up until now has been past tense. Would past tense work here? You want to make sure you're avoiding redundancies or basic repetitions. If something has already been said, it does not need to be said again. This goes hand in hand with that, keeping it simple. Okay, they don't want repetition. They don't need you to state things twice. So this goes for things like descriptive words, parts of sentences, or repeated ideas. If it's already been said once and they ask you, do you need it again? The answer is probably no. Pay attention to transition words. So fanboys, for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Those are going to help you with organization. Answer choices do give you hints. So if you get to a question and you're not quite sure what they want you to do with that question, take a look at the answer choices. And if you suddenly see, oh, they're changing up the verb, or they're changing the pronoun, or they're doing something with a comma, then that will kind of give you a chance to go, okay, they're asking a comma question, and go into kind of that part of your brain where you keep all those comma rules. Now, be aware there sometimes will be an option for no change. And on average, no change is correct about 25% of the time. So don't be afraid to use it if you get to a question and there doesn't seem to be anything wrong, then no change could be a viable answer. So some go-to rules before we get into that. Do we have any questions before we move on to our next part? Nope. All right, cool. So we are going to keep on moving then. So apostrophes are some of the most common things that you will see, and kind of the easiest to get down. So be aware that if a word is singular or if it's plural, but it doesn't end in S, then you need to add an S. So for example, the fox becomes the foxes with apostrophe S. The women become the women's. And this might be the fox's tail or the women's dresses. That's showing that they own something, they're possessing something. Now, in order to create a possessive for a plural word that does not end in S, you place the apostrophe at the end of the word after the S. So, for example, the archaeologists, we wanted to make that plural, we would say the archaeologist's bones. Okay, and we kind of say that extra of S, but we don't write it. Now, if a person's name ends in S, you do the same thing. So, for example, my fiance's name is Thomas. So, if we're talking about Thomas's car, we would say Thomas and add the apostrophe at the end. We do not need to add a second S. So, take a look at this practice. Where do we need to add an apostrophe? At the Tinker's Convention, Jose browsed for a long time before deciding he wanted to buy something from the leather worker's stall. Take a minute. Where might we put some apostrophes and throw those into the chat? Yep, workers would be correct. And we've got one more in the sentence. Can you see where we might need an additional apostrophe S? Yeah, at Tinker. So it would be at the Tinker's apostrophe S convention. Jose browsed for a long time before deciding he wanted to buy something from the leather worker's stall. Now, that workers could be questionable because we could actually say multiple leather workers' stalls or just one. But because we're talking about a singular stall, it's a good guess that leather worker is also singular. Okay. So we're going to take a few more practices here. So where do we need an apostrophe? Our test question, sample question. When my computer crashed, I lost a month's work on my plan to take over the world. Where might we throw in an apostrophe? Very good. Yep, months. And with month being singular, because it is a single month worth of work, we would have it month apostrophe S. So we lost a month, not 2 months. And then we know we're talking about two. So this is where context clues can come in handy. So if we were to say, when my computer crashed, I lost 5 months worth of work, then we would have 5 month S and then the apostrophe, because we could be talking about multiple months. Next one, my sister's car is always filthy and in need of a deep clean. Very good. We're talking about this one sister. And I returned the library's book to the Dropbox, hoping they would forgive my late fee. Perfect. Yep, single library, owning one book. All right. So here is an example from an actual ACT exam pulled from a test. So Benjamin Banneker, African-American inventor and astronomer, grew up on his family's farm in Colonial, Maryland. So we're looking at that underlined families. So we have a no change here. We have family apostrophe S, families plural with an S, with an apostrophe, or families with nothing at all. So kind of my logic in thinking about a question like this is I'd go, okay, do we even need an apostrophe? Well, is the family owning something? Yeah, it's owning the farm. So we would want to show that it is is owning something. So that instantly crosses out D. And now we have to decide, are we talking singular or plural? And you are correct. The answer is B. We're talking about one family, his family, and they are owning the farm. So it would be family, singular, apostrophe S. Okay. So with contractions, this is kind of a continuation of that apostrophe rule. So apostrophes replace the missing letter or letters. Contractions are pretty informal, but they do pop up on the test because they often use passages that are formal and informal. So quick thing on contractions, for example, do not becomes don't. They have becomes they've. The ACT does not usually ask questions about contractions, but you do need to know the full version of a contraction. So, because, for example, they will put on there could have, should have, and would have. And when you see could have, should have, and would have, this is kind of a common mistake because it sounds like could have, should have, would have. And if we contract could have, should have, and would have, we get could have, should have, and would have, which sounds like could of, should of, and would of. So this is something that they will put on there. So that is a hard, fast rule. Whenever you see could of, should of, or would of, it is automatically incorrect because that is just not how you say that. It should be could have or could have, should have or should have, or would have or would have. If you see any contractions, and here's a Miss Danner tip, and this has really been useful for a lot of my kids. If you see a contraction on the ACT English, go ahead and take that second to break it open into the two words that make it. Because sometimes they throw its, which sometimes its is ITS and sometimes it's IT apostrophe S. And if you break it open into it is and it still works, then that changes what you do with the answer. But sometimes they throw in a contraction like there, they are. And if you break it open, suddenly it doesn't make sense anymore. You know they're using the wrong there. So it's always just a good practice that when you see any contraction, just go ahead and break open that contracted word into its two parts and try the sentence again. So a practice. I should have gone to bed early, but I stayed up to play video games instead. Where is our error that we need to fix? Very good. Yep, that should have needs to be changed to should of apostrophe VE or should have. Okay, I jumped through that one really quickly. So I actually came across this really funny TikTok. It kind of made me laugh, but it is all about some of the rules, the common ACT rules. So I thought I would share it with y'all. Have you seen this one yet?
No, probably
Okay.
not.
Good. So kind of made me laugh. I thought I would share it with y'all mid notes just to kind of break it up. But she goes over quite a few of the common ACT apostrophe rules and has like kind of a song for it. So it kind of worked.
Whereas it is ownership, and then means what's next versus then, which contrasts. Don't confuse this too with this too or this too. This song is for all the grammar freaks. It's okay to mess up, cause grammar is stuff like who's versus whom or loose versus lose. And maybe I'm the only one who cares when people mix up their
that just made me laugh, but that was kind of a catchy way to remember some of the different common problems, especially those apostrophes. All right. Oops, we're not gonna watch again. Okay. So one of the ones that she brought up was the its, and its. And so this is kind of a combination of the pronoun rule and the apostrophe rule. And kind of a side note, be aware that on the ACT, especially the English section, they like to combine rules. So you're not usually going to get a question that's just on one rule. You're going to get a question that's combining two rules. So they might ask you an its question, and it's not only an its for the pronoun, but it's also an its for the apostrophe. So when you see its apostrophe s, this is a contraction of it is or it has. So this is one of those places where testing it by breaking its open into it is or it has will give you an idea if it really needs to be apostrophe s. Now, it's with none is the possessive form. And this can be a bit confusing because typically to show possession, you're adding an apostrophe. But with it's the exact opposite. So this is where with that apostrophe s, we want to focus on using it for the contraction first, not possession. And then its apostrophe is not a word. It's never going to be there. It's never an option to be correct. If you see its apostrophe, automatically know it's wrong. It's not going to be a correct answer. And I have actually seen its apostrophe on an ACT practice. So just know that that apostrophe at the end is never going to be a correct answer. So semicolons is another punctuation that does pop up. With semicolons, you treat it like a comma, which is why they're often tested with, putting that comma in. But semicolons help clarify a relationship between phrases and clauses. So with a semicolon, you are connecting two independent clauses. And a way to test this is, could you replace that semicolon with a period? So let's take a look at our practice there. After seeing that the amusement park had 4 roller coasters, Maria was determined to ride them all. Could we put a period where this semicolon is? Could we just say, after seeing that the amusement park had 4 roller coasters, and just end it right there? Hey, Harper. Yeah, no, because with that after makes it problematic, right? After seeing that the amusement park had 4 roller coasters, you're kind of left hanging like, okay, after seeing it, what happened? So when we have these kind of, hold on one second. Harper, stop. When you have this right here, this is going to kind of leave you dangling, which is why a semicolon and testing it with a period suddenly shows that it's not going to work. So to fix this, we could say the amusement park has 4 roller coasters, semicolon. Maria was determined to ride them all. Or there's another way to fix it. Oh, I'm sorry. That one only had one way to fix it. I've got one that's got 2. So if we take a look at this and test it, putting a period here, could we say the amusement park has 4 roller coasters, period. Maria was determined to ride them all, period. Yeah, we suddenly have 2 complete sentences and life is good. So when you see a semicolon, test it by adding that period. Okay. Now, colons, on the other hand, do a different thing. Usually they're used to introduce a list or an explanation. But the thing with them is they must come after a complete sentence. So the way to test a colon to see if it's being used properly is to replace it with a period to end the first part, but the second is not going to be a complete sentence. So let's take a look at the practice. Liz went to the costume shop for the supplies she needed for Halloween, including fake blood, plastic spiders, and a witch's hat. So to test this, we're going to put a period where the colon is and see if what's in front of the colon is a complete sentence. So Liz went to the costume shop for the supplies she needed for Halloween, including, period. Is that a complete sentence? Can that all stand by itself? Nope. That including just kind of throws it. So in order to fix this, we have one way to fix it. Liz went to the costume shop for the supplies she needed for Halloween, colon, fake blood, plastic spiders, and a witch's hat. Now, if we test that and put a period here, is everything before it going to be a complete sentence? Liz went to the costume shop for the supplies she needed for Halloween. Yeah, we could put a period there and just end it. All right, dashes. Now, dashes tend to throw people because there are different types of dashes, but the ACT really only focuses on one main way to use a dash, and that is to mark off a non-essential clause. Dashes can be treated just like a pair of commas, and that's the thing to remember is that with dashes, they usually come in pairs, just like pairs of commas. Okay, so on our example here, Allie was minding her own business when her brother, a mischievous 8-year-old, snuck up and surprised her. So, in that practice sentence, where is the piece of the sentence that we could get rid of because we don't absolutely have to have it? It's just giving us more detail or more information. Yeah, that piece after her brother. So, a mischievous 8-year-old is extra information about her brother, but we don't really have to have it there. So, we could take it out. And so, by framing it with either a pair of commas, one on each end, or a pair of dashes, one on each end, then we can fix that sentence and make it correct while also showing our reader, hey, you're about to read a little extra information. So our two corrects would be either doing a pair of dashes or doing a pair of commas, and both of them would be correct. So what I did in the incorrect one by putting one comma and one dash is one of the most frequent ways that ACT has rules on dashes. So if you only see one dash, you need to be looking, is there anywhere else in the sentence that I could add a matching dash for that pair? Otherwise, you probably don't need the dash. So here is an example. But all kayakers can appreciate the nuances of nature as they travel on water in this simple but versatile boat. So what would we do here to fix it? No change, simple with nothing, simple with a dash, or simple with a semicolon. But remember, when we have a dash, it's going to come in a pair. And so is there anywhere that we already have a dash that we're needing to add a second one to give it a pair? Okay, so let's look at some of our other options. Well, when we talked about semicolons, all right, semicolons, we could replace with a period, and they're going to be separating two complete sentences. So here we go. But all kayakers can appreciate the nuances of nature as they travel on water in this simple. Could we put a period there? I mean, can we end our sentence right there? And then after it, but versatile boat, is that even remotely a complete sentence? No, we don't have an action. We don't have a verb. So with this one, semicolon's not going to work. Dash is not going to work. So we're just left with no change or no comma. So between the no change and no comma, what do you think is our best answer? Okay, so let's break down this sentence because when we have a comma and a conjunction, which we will spend some more time on commas, but when we have a comma and a conjunction, we're separating two complete sentences with a comma conjunction. So think of a comma conjunction as being, if you have a comma conjunction, you could replace that comma conjunction with a period. You could end that sentence and have two complete thoughts. So we already kind of tested that with the semicolon, which it didn't work. So yeah, you'd be correct on the B. We don't need any comma there at all because we need this simple but versatile boat are just two adjectives describing the noun. So some of the quick rules that we talked about with punctuation today are possessives. so that the apostrophe goes before the S for singular nouns and plural nouns that don't end in S, and after the S for plural nouns that do end in an S. With contractions, this is an apostrophe replacing the missing letter. So we're smashing two words together, and all the letters we took out, we're replacing with that apostrophe. Possessive pronouns don't have apostrophes. So it's. Semicolons connect two complete sentences. So if you see a semicolon, check that what's in front of it and what's after it can be their own sentences. Colons come after a complete sentence and introduce a list or an explanation. So test a colon by asking, is everything in front of the colon a complete sentence? And dashes mark off that extra information that we don't really have to have in the sentence. So if you have one dash, you should probably have a second. Or if you have one dash, you may not need it because you're not setting off that extra information. So we are going to do a timed practice today. I am going to send you in the chat box, I'm going to send you a link to our practice today. We're going to be using the Crack ACT website. As soon as I can get out, there we go. So we're going to start with the first one. I would suggest when you are doing this, if you are able to on a computer, I would suggest actually opening the link twice so that you can have the passage side by side. And this will allow you to keep the passage on one side and you can be scrolling with the questions on the other so that you can kind of answer the questions a little quicker. All right, there is the link. So I would open that twice in two separate tabs, put it side by side. And then we are going to set a timer. So just let me know when you are set up, however you would like to be set up, and I will start our timer. Now do remember with the ACT English that you are planning on about 9 minutes per section. So I will be setting a 9-minute timer. I'll give you a warning about halfway through so that you do have that reminder. And if you are doing this at home, I am going to pause the video while the timer is running, just so we don't have 9 minutes of dead space. But I will start the recording again when we start going over questions, so that if there are any that we need to that we go over that you needed some extra explanation on, you have that. Okay. So Trinity, all right, you're ready. I'm going to hit start on your 9 minutes and begin. All right. So if you are just rejoining us from doing this on your own, we're going to go over some of the questions that were missed. And if you missed any of them as well, you can follow along with our explanation. Okay, so I'm giving our participants a chance to chime in with the questions they want us to go over. And then I will go over those questions. So give them a second to do that. Okay. All right, so I saw 10. Okay, so let's go on to number 10. We're looking at this sentence right here. Okay. Wanting to settle the dispute once and for all, when they decided to not combine 3 separate races already held annually on the island into one massive test of endurance. So with that one, they are asking us for the best placement of the underlined phrase already held annually on the island. And what we want to think about here is, what is that phrase telling us more about? What is it modifying? And, you know, if you ask yourself what was already held annually on the island, then you'd answer that question by saying the 3 separate races. So when you're thinking about where best to put, so if you think about where best to put something, it's next to the thing that it's modifying. So our base idea is the 3 separate races. And then we ask ourselves, well, what about the 3 separate races? They were already held annually on the island. And then we can go into, what is done with them. They were combined into one massive test. But if we were to move that, for example, before the word wanting, you're moving it all the way to the very front of the sentence. So it would now say, already held annually on the island, wanting to settle the dispute once and for all. Well, what was already held on the island annually, wanting to settle the dispute? You've taken it away from the noun that it's modifying. If we check once, wanting to settle the dispute, let's see, before the word once, wanting to settle the dispute already held annually on the island once and for all. Well, doing that makes it sound like the thing that's held annually on the island is a dispute, not the 3 races. And then the last option is after the word endurance. So wanting to settle the dispute once and for all, when they decided to combine 3 separate races combine 3 separate races, into one massive test of endurance already held annually on the island. Well, that makes it sound like this combined race is already held on the island, where this would be the first time it had ever been done. So the only place keeping that phrase works is where it is now, because it's next to the thing that it needs to stay by, which is that phrase, 3 separate races. Okay. Were there any others you needed to go over? Okay, so I'm going to send you a link for the next practice. Let's go ahead and get another timed practice in and see if there are any that we need to go over. So give me 1 second to pull that link. Okay. All right, and the link for practice number 2 is in the chat. For those of you who are pacing along on your own afterwards, all of these practice links are in the slides, so you can access them there to be able to get to those links to do the practices with us. So go ahead, Trinity, let me know when you are all set up and ready to go, and then I will hit time on your timer. And believe it or not, I am actually doing these with you. So when you're taking it, I'm taking it. Okay. All right. At this point, if you are doing this at home, I'm going to pause the recording and we will come back together in 9 minutes and I'll resume recording if there are any questions that we need to go over. And Trinity, ready, begin. All right, and so now we're rejoining to go over any questions that we missed. So my session participants will be chiming into the chat with their missed questions. At this time, if you're taking it at home, look over your answers and look at the explanations for each of the questions on the ones you might have missed. We'll be going over some questions as soon as they have had a chance to look at the questions they need us to go over. Okay, so that will be just fine then. That's one thing I love about the Crack ACT is that they do have those little explanations for each question so that you can kind of take a look at what you got wrong. And a lot of times the explanation is pretty good at showing you what you missed. All right. Let's see, it's 5:10. I have you until 6. So let's do another practice. I will send the next practice link. Give me 1 second to get that pulled up. All right. I have sent the link for practice number 3. And Trinity, you are good to stay with me until 6. Okay. All right. Perfect. So get yourself set up and then just let me know when you are ready. You should be on the Give a Snake a Break passage. All right. So again, if you're pacing along with us at home after the session, I will be setting a 9-minute timer for the next session. We're doing the practice number 3. And I will be pausing the recording and coming back when our 9-minute timer has gone off. All right, Trinity, you are ready to go. I am hitting start. Okay, we are returning from our timed practice number 3. Our participants are going to be throwing their missed questions into the chat, anything that they want us to go over or want some clarification on. I'm going to give them a second to do that. If you're doing this at home and you hit submit, you will get a list of the ones that you got right and wrong. And they actually give you a little explanation on every question. So you can go into the ones that you've missed and click that explanation and see those answers. All right, we're going to take a look at number. Okay, we're going to take a look at number 30. Was it 32? 32. Okay, so let's take a look at number 32. Given that all of the following statements are true, which one provided the most relevant information at this point in the essay? Okay, yeah, this one actually almost tripped me up a little bit, and I had to go back and reread that entire paragraph to make sure that I was looking at the right thing. So at this point in the essay, that's the phrase that you want to pay attention to, because if we were looking at the overall essay, we would probably have picked G. But at this point in the essay, we've got throughout much of history, snakes have had a reputation for being more deadly than they actually are. Negative associations abound. And then we get a colon. And that kind of tells us, ooh, we're about to get a list. A snake in the grass is a seemingly innocent person intent on causing harm. So that's one example of that negative association, a snake in the grass. And then we get a snake charmer uses flattery to distract you from his shady intent. That's another common term, using snake in a negative way. All right, and then we continue on. Nearly every reference to a snake in that population Nearly every reference to a snake that is popular in modern society bears this negative connotation. So every single one of those sentences was an example of using snake in a negative way. So if we go into our answers, snake oil refers to fake medicine that promises impossible results. Well, that fits in with using these other common terms like snake in the grass and a snake charmer. So adding that one in would add some relevant information, and it also follows with what's going on in the paragraph at that moment. I did almost put G, and then I had to go, wait a second, and I went back in and saw that these sentences were all about those common snake terms. So that would make 32F. Okay. All right. Okay, did you have any others you wanted to go over? All right, Trinity, did you have any others that you wanted to go over, or? Nope. Okay. All right. So I would say let's do another one. Um, get some extra practice in. I will be sending that link in just a second. Okay. All right. Practice number 4 is in the chat box. This would be the Zora Neale Hurston passage. We again will be doing a 9-minute timer. For those of you who are going to be joining us later to do these practices on your own, I will once again pause our recording and come back when we are ready to discuss. Okay. All right. 9-minute timer starting now. All right, and that is time. If you missed any, take a second to look at those that you missed. Read through the explanations for each of those to see what you might have missed. I am waiting for participants to chime in with questions they'd like us to go over. So if we have any of those, then we'll take a look at those and go through the explanations. All right, so let's take a look at number 59. Got it. All right, number 59. Right here, history has shown that Hurston was right. However, modern critics admire her authentic, skillful representation. All right, so here we're looking at the use of that transition word, however. Typically, if you're using however, you're using it in a comparative sense, like you're going to say one thing and then give the opposite following that. But here, history has shown that Hurston was right. We don't want to change direction. Like we want the next sentence to agree with that idea. And it does. Modern critics admire her authentic and skillful representation of the language. So we don't need that, however, because typically, however, shows a change of direction or agreement. Like, my favorite color is green. However, I hate the color lime green, right? I'm showing a change in direction. I'm showing that I'm changing my mind. I'm showing that I'm going from liking one thing to the opposite of not liking. So we don't want that switch here. With this switch, we want to stay consistent. So with our answer options, we have no change. We have keeping modern. We have thus, comma, modern, and in addition, modern. So let's try each of those. History has shown that Hurston was right. However, modern critics admire. Well, we already said that's not working because we don't need that switch of direction or of agreement with however. So then A is out. All right. History has shown that Hurston was right. Modern critics admire her authentic and skillful representation of the language. So that seems to work because we don't really need to interrupt the thought if we're just continuing with the same level of agreement. So far, B is looking the best. C, history has shown that Hurston was right. Thus, modern critics admire her authentic and skillful representation. Well, typically with thus, we're going to be showing an example or the next step in a process. For example, she liked to eat cheese, thus she went to the store and bought more, right? We're showing that continuation of the idea, this happened, thus this happened. This happened, so this happened. So we don't really need that here because again, we're continuing with that same idea. And then our last option, history has shown that Hurston was right. In addition, modern critics admire her authentic and skillful representation. So again, that one's not terrible, but do we really need to interrupt the flow of sentence 1 to sentence 2? Not really, because again, we want to stay that consistent agreement of history has shown she was right. Here is how critics agree with that. And so our best answer would then be B for 59. Okay. And this is a really good example of what we talked about earlier, where you don't just want to look at what the underlined portion is, especially when it comes to transition words, because a lot of times transition words are connecting two sentences. So we have to look at how those two sentences are in relation to each other. Do they build off of each other? Is it a change of direction? Is it a reason and then an example? And you need to kind of see how those two sentences fit together in order to know if you need a transition or not. Okay. Any more, Trinity? Okay. How about we push through, do one more, and then that means you've pretty much done a full practice test. You would have done a full 75 question practice test, which is good practice. I actually really like this Zora Neale Hurston because there was quite a few that I had to stop and kind of think about. So I like using this passage, but let's fit one more in. And that means you have done a full 75 question practice today, which is great. So give me 1 second to pull that next link and I will drop it in the chat. Okay. All right. That last link is dropped into the chat. Go ahead and set it up and just let me know when you are ready to begin the timer. For those of you who are completing this video after our session, we'll be again setting a 9-minute timer. I will be pausing recording and coming back when we are ready to go over missed questions. Okay, so we are now starting our 9-minute timer and begin. That is time on our final passage. If you have any questions, put them into the chat box. If you are doing this on your own pace, look through your answers and flag the ones that you got incorrect and take a look at those explanations that Crack ACT includes. We will hopefully see everybody at the next English session, and you do have a session this Thursday as well, so make sure that you are keeping track of that. Have a good night, everybody.